The NBA season is not as far away as it once seemed like it was going to be, meaning that barring, a few more Utah Jazz role player trades, teams are who they're going to be. We can start talking about what it's going to look like for them next season. So for this video, pretty simple concept. I'm going through every team in the NBA and giving the biggest problem I think they have going into next year. Now, the problem with this is that there's a lot of teams that are rebuilding, and it doesn't make a ton of sense to tell you why the Spurs might not look great on the court. So for some teams, I've got on the court stuff, and for some teams, I have more like long-term team building stuff, kind of depending on where they are as a team. So not all of it's going to be stuff you'll see game one, but I think it makes more sense for the video. That being said, let's get right into it, alphabetical order. All right, starting us off is the Atlanta Hawks, and I said their biggest problem was DeJounte Murray off the ball. Now, I don't have a problem with the DeJounte Murray move itself. I think it gives them a really consistent number 2 option, which is probably what I would have said was their biggest problem last year, but I'd be lying if I said the fit was perfect. Obviously, with Trae Young, the ball's going to be in his hands a lot, and DeJounte Murray is not a super strong off-ball player, so getting the fit to work there is going to be the biggest challenge of the Hawks season. And it's probably going to be a little bit of a struggle. I mean, I saw a quote today from Atlanta. I don't remember who said it, saying like, yeah, there's probably going to be a rough patch to start the season, some time to figure it out. So that's what I'm expecting for them. If Atlanta gets through this season and they're like a first round exit, or it doesn't turn out the way they want, but Young and Murray are really clicking by the end of it, I would still consider that season a success. So that's what I'm looking out for them. The Boston Celtics, I said their biggest problem was that they lost their head coach for the year. I'm not going to lie to you. We don't really have a ton of super clear information on exactly what happened, and that situation's still pretty murky. But what we do know is that 3 weeks before the season starts, Boston has a new head coach. What exactly that's going to look like, I don't know. And I think for the most part, they'll probably be trying to do similar stuff that they were doing last year. But Boston, for as talented as they are, definitely had some offensive problems last season. They're not a team that is just like so ridiculously great that there's no chance that they could have some struggles because of that. Their offense can get stagnant. So that's what I'm going to be watching out for them. Still love the team. Still think, they're just so stacked and their defense is amazing. But that whole situation has got to be like the surefire big thing happening to them right now. The Brooklyn Nets, this is going to be one that you hear a few times, but their health. And I think what scares me about them being healthy is not even necessarily like getting to the playoffs and not having everybody, although that's obviously like a big problem, but it's getting everybody on the same page in the regular season. It's not enough if you rest everybody and they all just get healthy at the right time. They need to play together. There's a lot of stuff that they need to figure out. Their offense looked like a disaster against the Celtics in the playoffs. Granted, they lost all those games and pretty close ones, and the Celtics went on a great run last year. But throwing Kyrie, Kevin Durant, and Ben Simmons all on there, those are the 3 best players. And Ben Simmons has the back problem. Kyrie, I don't remember the last time he played a full season. Kevin Durant, is getting older, and he's had injury problems too. So if they want to work out that offense, they need to be doing a lot more on offense than they're doing now. If they want to get to that point, especially now that you throw Ben Simmons in the mix and you need to figure all that out, they need to play a lot of games together. They need to stay healthy, and they've got a lot of important players who are pretty injury prone. So I would say that's their biggest problem. The Charlotte Hornets, their biggest problem is the Miles Bridges situation right now. And I don't exactly know how that's going to play out, whether or not he'll be allowed to play in the NBA again, or whether or not the Hornets will want him back. Although there's that quote today from LaMelo Ball saying he hoped to see him back on the team. But ultimately what this does for them is it puts them in a state of limbo, right? Because with Miles on the team before this happened, they were still trying to be pretty competitive. And there's a lot of teams that are trying to be competitive, but maybe shouldn't, and maybe should be in a little bit more of a rebuild. But the Hornets were actually doing an okay job. They won 43 games last year, and you could see the path to them like, okay, I get why we have Hayward. I get why we have Rozier. We want to be good. We want to be winning games. We don't want to go through like a full rebuild with LaMelo on the team and getting him to stay. But now, if Miles is not on the team, they're not really all that great. They're like fighting to be in the plans. And that doesn't necessarily doom them forever, but it means that their timeline should look more like the Pistons or the Rockets. And if that's their timeline, they should trade Gordon Hayward. They should probably trade Terry Rozier. But because they don't know whether or not they're going to have Miles, and because they haven't made a decision on whether or not they want to keep him, which is partly their own fault, they're in that weirdo, we're going to win 35 games territory that they absolutely love to live in for as long as I've been a fan of them. So that's right now their biggest problem. Their direction got kind of messed up. And granted, I don't blame the Hornets front office for what Miles did, but the lack of reaction is killing them right now. The Chicago Bulls, their biggest problem is Vucevic right now. And I guess I could say maybe Lonzo being hurt, but I'm going to go with Vucevic. They traded multiple first-round draft picks for him. They gave up Wendell Carter for him, who you could easily argue is better than Vucevic right now as we speak. And as of right now, he has absolutely not lived up to that trade, and he's only getting older. It's very frustrating for them because that was kind of a win-now move. It was a pretty serious win-now move. And granted, it definitely made them better than they have been in a while. I mean, it's been a long time since the Bulls were competitive. Not since, I guess, well, not that long. Not since Jimmy Butler and Rondo and Dwayne Wade, which was a weird team. But not getting what they wanted to get out of him is kind of killing him. He needs to shoot better from three, right? He needs to be a little bit tougher on defense. He needs to be more efficient on offense. And it's put them in this weird spot where they made a big win now move. And instead of being a team that maybe wasn't going to win a championship, but was going to go have some good playoff series, maybe win a few, now they're a team where you can, okay, maybe they'll make the playoffs. But as of right now, maybe you can see them making the playoffs, although I don't know if you project them to even at this point. They could be the 9th best team in the East. But even if they do, it is very hard to imagine a world where they win a playoff series. And that is the absolute worst spot that you can be in the playoffs. Much like the Hornets. You can imagine a world where, although the Hornets are worse than the Bulls, don't get me wrong, but you can imagine a world where I guess the Hornets could make the play-ins, and if you make the play-ins, you only need a couple of wins, so anything can happen. But then are they going to go beat a top 4 seed? Probably not. Same thing with the Bulls. I can imagine a world much easier that where they make the playoffs, but are they going to go beat the 76ers or the Bucks or the Celtics in a 7-game series? It's hard to see that, and it makes it a little hard to get excited about their team. So that's what they're facing. The Cleveland Cavaliers' biggest problem is their backcourt defense. I love the Donovan Mitchell trade. However, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell defensively is a little concerning. What's kind of interesting about it is that a lot of people didn't like the fit of Colin Sexton and Darius Garland because, those are both two guards who are not that strong defensively. Granted, for also other reasons, but with Donovan Mitchell, last time we saw him in the playoffs, it was rough. It has not been great recently. And we've seen him be better. And I wonder if getting into a new situation on a new team that's exciting and young, and I think better than what the Jazz were with a higher ceiling, maybe rejuvenates him a little bit and gets him back in the mix. But they could definitely have a problem with that. Now, they're not in terrible shape defensively because luckily they have Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, who are two amazing interior defenders. But when you get in the playoffs, it's definitely going to be a problem if you have two guards who you're able to attack. So how they handle that is what I'm watching for them this year. The Dallas Mavericks' biggest problem right now is their defensive personnel. They made some additions this offseason in Christian Wood and JaVale McGee, and I like both of those. I don't hate those. I see the vision with them. But at the end of the day, when they lost to the Warriors, one of their biggest problems was Powell is just not, a guy you can start at the 5 in the playoffs in big playoff series like that and be successful. And really, for the most part, they don't have a ton of super high level defenders. And they're not like just a whole bunch of duds out there or anything. But to win a championship, you've got to have a great defense almost all of the time. If you look, last 20 years, how many teams didn't have a top 10 defense? Very few of them. As of right now, Luka's absolutely unbelievable. 1A, absolutely could win a championship with him. And they've got a lot of juice on offense. Christian Wood and Dinwiddie and Tim Hardaway Jr. They've got guys, but I think they really lack, how are they going to go be threatening on defense? I'm not sure. Christian Wood has been a good defender before, but he wasn't last year. So I think if they're going to solve that, you're going to see JaVale McGee play within his role very well. And I'm a big JaVale McGee fan. I think he's a very valuable role player. That's why he's always on championship teams. And you're going to see Christian Wood play a little bit better on defense and provide a little bit more interior defense. And that's the big thing for them is the interior defense has to be better. They got away in the Jazz series with Maxi Kleber out there and stuff like that. And they obviously beat the Suns. But when it comes down to it, if you don't have strong interior defenders, it's very hard to win a championship. And I just don't know if that's on the roster as of right now. And that brings us to the Denver Nuggets, who kind of had the same problem. Their biggest question is Jokic's playoff defense. He, by all means, has gotten better. And I don't think he's a dud. But again, once you get in the playoffs, it gets a little bit more serious. And there's definitely been some concerns about whether or not he can keep up with that pace and whether or not if teams are going to go after him, if he's going to be good enough as a 5 to play the role of great interior defender. Because as of right now, he hasn't quite reached that level. He's not as bad as maybe some people make him out to be, but he's also not as good as you would like him to be. And overall, the Nuggets are a little bit questionable on defense overall. Now, they added some good pieces to, I think, improve the defense. Aaron Gordon was obviously a big add a little while ago. KCP, who I love, I thought was a great addition. Bruce Brown was another good one. But at the end of the day, it's going to be very, very hard to have a strong defense if Jokic is not pulling his own weight. So that's what we're going to have to look for, how they're going to attack that. Next, we've got the Detroit Pistons, and I didn't have anything super serious for them. They're kind of in like, okay, we've got a bunch of young guys. Let's see what we've got in them mode. But I guess the one thing is Isaiah Stewart, Bagley, Jalen Duren, playing all of those guys spacing-wise might be a little bit tough, so we could say spacing. But they just traded for Bojan, and that definitely makes me feel a lot better about it since he'll be able to play the 4 and make it a little bit easier on everybody. Because even if you are a rebuilding team, you still want to have like regular NBA level spacing. So when the guys are out there, it makes it a little bit easier to develop them, makes the offense a little bit easier. And on top of that, if Ivy isn't coming out and shooting super well right off the bat and his 3-pointer isn't good right away, because, a lot of times shot creators like that struggle first half of their first season. We saw it with Jalen Green. We saw it with Anthony Edwards, and both those guys obviously have turned out pretty solid. But I don't really have anything super serious for them because of the position they're in. And I've liked what they've done this offseason. The Golden State Warriors, NBA champions, shockingly, do not have any big problems other than their big 3 is getting older. That's their big problem. It's kind of hard to predict exactly when these guys are going to start showing their age. Curry obviously hasn't too much coming off a finals MVP, but Draymond isn't the offensive player he once was, and Clay's been banged up. The older you get, the higher the injury risk. And I would say overall the concern for them, if you had one, considering they're coming off a big championship run, is that you don't want the big 3 to fall off before some of the young guys catch up. Like, yeah, they're great now, and they could go win a championship with the roster they have right now. But how good could they be if Curry and Draymond and Klay Thompson are all still playing high-level basketball when Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody and maybe James Wiseman and Jordan Poole all are starting to play a little bit more like their prime versions of themselves, and all those guys start to turn out? And I don't know exactly the timeline on, when do we expect Moody to be great? When do we expect, Kuminga to be great? He's just 19 years old still, like Tatum for real, man. But that's what I'm watching for them. At some point, Curry, Draymond, Clay are going to have to take those steps back. And at some point, they're going to start to regress. How fast is that going to happen, and when is it going to happen? The Houston Rockets' biggest problem is that they're missing their own draft picks. That's their big problem. They've done a really good job with their rebuild. I love Jalen Green. I think he could totally be a 1A type guy. But it's definitely tough when you're in, we only care about playing our young guys mode, and you don't have your own pick to, take advantage of maybe only winning 25, 30 games in a season. You look at a team like Orlando, for example. Orlando, I actually think might not be so bad this year, but Orlando is more concerned with playing the young guys, and they're probably not going to win a ton of games. And I think the fans are fine with that and excited to go watch the young players, just like they are with the Rockets. But on top of that, if you're an Orlando fan, you could say, what would happen if we were bad and we got lucky in the lottery again? Same thing with the Pistons. Hey, we might not win that many games this year, but what if we get lucky in the lottery again? With the Rockets, I'm actually not even sure if they're missing this next year's pick or the pick after or exactly how it is. But for one of these seasons, you're not going to be able to say that for them. And it's not the end of the world, but it's definitely disappointing. They also have all those future Nets picks, so we might be saying, in 3 or 4 years, aren't they so lucky to have Brooklyn's picks if Brooklyn, falls off a cliff, which they may. The Indiana Pacers, their big problem is that they won't trade Miles Turner and Buddy Hield. And granted, this is not a big one because this is a rebuilding team. But let Miles Turner go, man. And it is bad asset management. I'm partially kidding, but it is bad asset management, isn't it? Miles Turner is on an expiring deal. He's played 40 games the last 2 years. and he doesn't quite fit the timeline of the team. You should move him now if he's not going to be a part of the long-term future and get something for him. That makes more sense. And same thing with Buddy Hield, too. It's like he is not going to be a long-term asset for them. If they could package those guys or get anything for him, they should go ahead and do it. And with Turner, I mean, how much value have they lost just holding on to him, right? And I get, when the Turner trade rumors were a thing, when Sabonis was on the team, they were still trying to be competitive. But now that they're not, obviously you don't want to force a move. I don't know exactly what they're looking at. But in an ideal world, they'd move both those guys. And maybe they will at the deadline, but you'd like to see that. The Los Angeles Clippers. Here's another one, contending team, really great. I think the Clippers are one of the best 4 teams I had them in the NBA. But their big problem is that their best 2 players are both coming off of major injuries and both above 30. And the absolute most important thing to winning a championship is staying healthy. And as of right now, the Clippers have not done a super great job of getting lucky and being healthy. And at a point, I mean, Kawhi Leonard has just missed an unbelievable amount of time in his career. So if they could get both those guys back and playing full strength with what they've added to the roster, I'd be super, super excited to see what they could do in a serious, real playoff run, because they haven't had one since the 3-1 bubble debacle. I'd like to see what Ty Lue can do. They've done everything they possibly can, but they go into the play-ins and the playoffs and they don't have both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. It doesn't feel like they're really competing for anything. So it's disappointing. They've got to be healthy. The Los Angeles Lakers. This is the big one. And this is another team where we could say health. And if you want to say that, I 100% agree. But what I'm going to say is that they do not have very strong role players. This was their problem last year. And admittedly, it is not as big of a problem this season. I can see some of the pieces working. I really like the Patrick Beverley pickup. But at the end of the day, if you're going to go win a championship, look at the Celtics. They didn't win a championship, but look at the Celtics. They have a lot of guys who can both shoot and play strong defense. And that's what you need. You need a lot of guys who can shoot and play strong defense. And the Lakers have some guys who can shoot now. They have more shooting than they had last year. And they have some guys who can play defense. They don't have a lot of guys who can do both. At the end of the day, if you're trying to put together a playoff lineup, a playoff rotation, you're not going to be able to get away with some of the lineups that they're going to be forced to put out there. If something happens to Patrick Beverley, are you going to have Russ out there? And are you going to have Anthony Davis, who didn't shoot well, out there? And are you going to have, Damian Jones out there? I mean, these are completely unserious rotations. How many positive defenders do they have? How many positive shooters do they have? Not nearly enough. And I think Darvin Ham's going to get them playing as good as he possibly can on defense. And I do expect them to be better. But at the end of the day, what made that 2020 Lakers team so good is that they had Caruso and KCP and Kyle Kuzma and Danny Green, although he was, maybe not the best version of himself with the Lakers. And all those guys are these great 3-and-D guys, and they lost all of them. And there's just no way that they're going to be able to get them all back. So they either need a big trade to recoup some of that, or they're going to need somebody to really step up. Because as of right now, I just don't quite see it with the role players on the roster. And I think that's what really killed them in the Russ trade. Not even Russell Westbrook himself, but losing the guys that they did. The Memphis Grizzlies, I think it's Jaren Jackson Jr. being out for a big chunk of the season this year. They're trying to build off what they did last year without making too many major additions. And I just don't know if they're in good shape to do that, especially with Jaren Jackson Jr. out. Because now you have the Nuggets that are back to full strength, and you have the Clippers that are back to full strength. So you could easily see them going from a 2 seed to possibly being a 5 seed. And we know they handle, things getting mixed up pretty well. Ja Morant missed time and they were still doing great. So maybe I'm underestimating that team and the coach and all that. But I think that Jaren Jackson Jr.'s defense is so valuable and it's hard to replace that. The Miami Heat's biggest problem, not even necessarily on the court, it's that they couldn't pull off a blockbuster trade. They're right there as far as winning a championship goes. And their window is right now, they got to make a move at this moment. And you saw the DeJounte Murray trade and you saw the Donovan Mitchell trade. And it definitely feels like the Miami Heat missed out on making that final push, that final addition to go win a championship. And it's not necessarily their fault. They didn't quite have a trade package to beat what Cleveland gave up for Donovan Mitchell. That was my number one landing spot for him. And they didn't, I understand why they wouldn't go after DeJounte Murray or anything like that. But you're definitely sitting here questioning, outside of like maybe Kyle Lowry rebounding a little bit, but he's 36 years old. You're questioning how exactly is this team going to be significantly better? You're looking for something out of Bam or Tyler Hero or something like that. So not pulling off that big move was probably the disappointment of the offseason. The Milwaukee Bucks, I would say that their big problem, if they need anything, it's another shot creator, right? It always feels like they're one guy short, and they were leaning on Grayson Allen some last year, granted because of injury more than they wanted to. But if they could get even just like another serious guy who is a big threat from the perimeter, I think that'd be the thing to add for them. I think it's definitely possible that they do that at the deadline. The Jazz are still making deals. Buddy Hield could be moved, who's more of like a three-point specialist a little bit, but still, I think that'd be a big addition for them. And they're in good shape because they're so good defensively, and their defensive personnel is so good that they don't necessarily need a player who is both like creating their own shot on offense and then a positive on defense. They can hide somebody if they need to, and that opens up their options a lot. So they're one of the teams that I'm looking for a big addition at the deadline. The Minnesota Timberwolves, I think this is the most obvious one. It's beating small ball. This is the problem that both Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns have, and I'm interested to see how they both work. Because with Karl Anthony Towns, his big problem is that you don't really trust him to go and beat a mismatch over and over and over. And I think Rudy Gobert's problem, a lot of people say it's the defense, but Rudy Gobert's problem is that, Dallas was able to put out Maxi Kleber against him, and he couldn't expose that, and that allowed them to take him out of the paint on the other end. So now that they're both on the same team, are they going to be able to get Rudy Gobert the ball in the posts where it makes it really tough to put a Maxi Kleber on him? Or is Karl Anthony Towns going to do a better job offensively against the fours, and that makes, his matchup harder? That's the big question for them. And if they can't figure out how to do it, this experiment won't work. And if they can, it will. I think it's that simple. The New Orleans Pelicans, I could be lazy and say Zion Williamson health, but that's so obvious. And he's played 80 games in 3 seasons. Not great. Okay. We all know that. So I'm going to say I'm interested in how their front court fit is going to work between Jonas and Zion. I understand the vision. Okay. Zion Williamson is this ridiculous paint monster, right? So Jonas is a guy who definitely can shoot more than the average center, but now I think for the spacing to work really well with them, they're going to need him to be hitting a lot of outside shots. Like he shot, I think 36% from 3, and that's great, but it was probably only on a couple attempts a game, right? Now they're going to need him to ramp up that production, and if he can't, all of a sudden having him and Zion out on the court at the same time is going to get a little bit tough. So I want to see how they work together, and there's more to it than just 3-point shooting, right? There's a mid-range stuff, which I know he's good at also, but Jonas needs to be good enough so where teams don't choose to just double Zion in the paint and leave him open and say, okay, well, you just beat us with threes. Because preferably you'd like them not to be able to do that so you can have Zion one-on-one, creating problems in the paint. The New York Knicks, I think they just lack an elite level playmaker. Julius Randle obviously wasn't who he was the year before, and Brunson is good, but maybe not great, and a lot of people didn't like that contract. And RJ Barrett, you're still waiting for him to make the leap. And they've got a pretty decent team, and I do think they're going to be in the play-ins, and I do think they're pretty strong defensively. But if you had to point out, okay, well, why aren't they, a solid playoff team? It's because you're not really sure they have a serious one, and that can be solved a lot of ways. Brunson can come in and play well. RJ Barrett can take a step and be more efficient from the mid-range and shoot threes like he did a couple years ago. Because he had a little bit of a down year last year. Or Julius Randle can be himself even a little bit more. And I do think there's some world where Randle doesn't necessarily, make all NBA second team, but he can be better than he was. And I think with a smaller workload, that could also cause him to be more efficient. So I'm interested to see how that works, what their offense exactly is going to look like. I don't think the Brunson addition is quite as bad as people make it out to be. And partially they are one of those teams where they can make the plans, they can make the playoffs, but can you imagine them winning a playoff series? It's a little bit hard unless, some really crazy stuff happens. But they're still looking for someone to seriously take over and say, this is my team, I'm the number one. And whether it's Barrett, Randall, or Brunson, someone's got to do it. The Oklahoma City Thunder. So they traded Westbrook about 3 years ago, and they did end up making the playoffs with Chris Paul, but really their rebuild started 3 years ago, and they happened. The game plan was not to make the playoffs with Chris Paul. However, even then, you're looking at it now, and they're going into a third straight season of the idea being we're going to be very bad. And now you don't get to see Chet, and Shea is having some injury problems too right now. And you're not seeing the path to them being like, okay, well, we're going to be, a playoff team, right? And it's not necessarily that things are going bad. They're just taking a long time. You need to see some of the guys start to really come along right now. Like, we need to see big things out of Giddey. Because you look at the Cavs, I mean, I don't want to make that the standard, but they lost LeBron in 2018 and they were good last year. And now they're great and they're out and contending. And I guess with the Thunder, the problem is that it's not that currently, right now, right this second, it's taken too long, but it doesn't project. Like, do they project to make the playoffs this year? No. Do they project to be competitive next year? Maybe, but they're still going to be crazy, crazy, crazy young. So at what point do they make that big move to go be competitive? Obviously not right now. And obviously I think they still have more time. But at this point, you'd like the path to be just a hair clearer than it is right now. But overall, I mean, they've got all the picks. They've got all the assets. I love Shea. I love Chet. Even if it takes a long time, I think it's going to work out for them. And I do also think that at any time they could, probably make a pretty big move when the right thing opens up because of how many assets they have. But as of right now, you're maybe looking at another couple years of being rough. And as fun as young teams are, you want to win games. The Orlando Magic, I really like their rebuild too. I really like what they've done. I think they're going to win more games than people expect. If I could bet in Ohio, I would bet the over on their win total. I think it was like 24.5. But the one thing that you're probably not super pleased with, Jalen Suggs, he has got to take a step this year. He's got to show a little bit more. And I think they'll be fine because Franz showed a lot last year, and you got Paolo this year. So even if he doesn't turn out, you still got a lot of talent. Things are still working out for the most part. But if he did turn out, how good would things be, right? And I was so high on him coming out of the draft. I thought the Raptors really messed up not drafting him, and I was wrong about that because Scotty's been so good. But when Suggs came in the league, I mean, I had totally the expectations that he was going to be a very high-level playmaker, and he just did not show it at all last year. And granted, those guys can take a little while to come along, but man, he probably had the roughest rookie season of most of the lottery picks as far as like expectations versus what they did. So he's been great on defense. There's still a lot of things to like, and I do think the shot will come along in time. But he might not live up to expectations, and I think that's the big concern with them. The Philadelphia 76ers, James Harden status. I don't know exactly what he's going to look like next year, and I think absolutely everything relies on that, right? I mean, Harden at the end of last year, the hamstring was bothering him, and he had lost all of his burst, and it was just tough for him to go out and win and play make, right? When he was first playing for the 76ers, though, he looked a lot better, and he looked a lot better last year when he was playing with the Nets. We know that he's not going to be 2018 James Harden, but he doesn't need to be. He needs to be second option James Harden to Embiid, and he can do that. And it's such a tough thing because that's really what it is. If he can't, create advantages off the dribble because he's lost his burst, he can be a great passer, he can be a great shooter, but there's only going to be so much that he can do. If he can do that, you're talking about a very good roster that I'm really excited to watch. So I think it all comes down to that. They've said he's healthy. They're not going to be like, yeah, he's actually like super messed up. They asked James Harden in the press conference, how do you feel? Oh, I feel horrible. I'm not going to be able to play at all. I think I'm going to shoot 30% from three and average more turnovers than assists. Like, it's just not the way it's going to go. So that's going to be one of the first things I'm watching for, and it's going to be something I'm watching for all season because he could come out strong, and then, as you get through the season and you're playing 70 games, you're playing 80 games, it can start to bother you again. I wonder how careful they're going to be with him. So we'll see. The Phoenix Suns, I could put them in the same category as the Miami Heat, where it's like they lost last year. They don't have a clear path to getting better. They had all these picks, and they just didn't make a move. And it's hard to be like, well, they're going to win the championship this year. I think it'll just work out better this time around. Like, that's not how it works, right? But I'll be a little bit more specific than that. I think their defensive personnel is like not that strong. There's a few things wrong with them. They're not built like a traditional championship team in the sense that, Devin Booker or Chris Paul as your best player is pretty low as far as best players on a team that wins a championship goes, as good as Devin Booker was last year. But I think their defensive personnel is not that scary, right? Mikal Bridges is awesome. DeAndre Ayton is a very good defensive center. And outside of that, you have a lot of guys who are good, but not threats once you get into the playoffs. Like Devin Booker was solid defensively. He can hold his own, but he's not scaring Luka. Chris Paul, God bless him, he's 45 years old. Jay Crowder does his things, and Cam Johnson is, okay, but it's tough once you get into the playoffs to say we're going to be able to go stop the best offense in the league or the best offenses in the league or the best players in the league in a 7-game series when there's a lot of ways to attack that defense, even though they are pretty good. And I don't even know what the solution for them is. I didn't really like the Kevin Durant trade ideas because I thought, we're going to trade Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton. Well, then you're going to have no good defensive players. I mean, KD's a pretty decent defender, but if KD is your best defender, that's not enough. That's just not his game, right? So I don't know exactly what I would even do if I was Phoenix. I think if you're going to project them to be better, it's going to be tough. You'd have to say Ayton's going to take a big step or something. I don't know. That's my problem with them. And it's my problem with the next team, too, the Portland Trail Blazers. I think their defensive personnel is not that good, particularly their interior defense. The Trailblazers have had this exact same problem since I can remember, right? And it's just, they know it's the case, and every fix they make is just not quite moving the needle enough. Robert Covington was a good defender. Was that going to change the entire defense? Not really. Jeremy Grant, is he a good defender? Yeah. Is that going to change the entire defense? Not really. Nurkic is okay, but he's always hurt. Dame is obviously getting older. He's never been a strong defender. There's probably still more weaker guys than stronger guys. And without good interior defense, which is really what they need and they've never had, it's going to be tough for them to be a significantly different team than what we've seen before. So, I kind of think they're running back the same stuff they've run back before, and maybe it'll work out better for them. They've had Enes Kanter and Carmelo Anthony at the 5 and the 4 in the playoffs against the best center in the world. So it's only going to go up from there, but I still think fundamentally they have the same problems. The Sacramento Kings, I'm interested to see how their spacing is going to work. Sabonis did not shoot that well for them last year, and neither did De'Aaron Fox. Those are their two most important players. You're going to have them on the court at the same time for a lot of time. How are you going to make the shooting work with that? My guess, a lot of Sabonis minutes at the 5, maybe. I think that's what you got to do. Because other than that, it's going to be Rashawn Holmes in. And if it's Holmes, Sabonis, Fox, it's going to be rough. Now, they've done some work to add some shooting. They have not ignored this problem. Last year they had probably the worst. They had to be the worst shooting team last year. Now they've added Malik Monk, who had a very good year from 3. They added Kevin Huerter, who's really good from 3. So they definitely made efforts. And I think there's some lineups that can work. And I think there's some worlds where they can win 40 games and they can be more competitive and interesting than they've been for a long time, right? But I still think at the end of the day, it's going to be pretty tough. But I think they're still going to have to put in a lot of work and be careful about what lineups they put in, or they're gonna still be throwing out some pretty weak stuff. All right, down to the last 4 teams here, and it's getting a little bit tougher because this one, the San Antonio Spurs, they just started a rebuild. They just started it, so we haven't even really seen what direction they're heading in. We haven't seen any of the moves they've made during this rebuild. I said it's that they don't have a super high upside 1A type guy yet. And of course they don't. But half of a rebuild is going out and getting that guy. And to an extent, you just have to get lucky and get a high draft pick or get lucky and hit somebody in the late lottery, right? They haven't had a chance to do that. And I feel like a lot of their players are, like Shohan, that's a great pick, but how high is his ceiling, right? Not as a number 1, number 2 option, probably. So I'm looking for them to add some guys who are going to be the leading shot creators, the leading playmakers in the future. But as of right now, they're just getting started. I don't disagree with the Murray trade, though. I really liked that. I thought that was we need to start moving in the right direction. We need to blow it up and start from square one. Teams are becoming a lot more willing to do that, and I'm glad they did. The Toronto Raptors, this is another tough one because this is the best run team in the league. They've got a lot of great defensive personnel. They've got a lot of really good players. I'm high on Siakam. I'm high on Scotty Barnes. I'm high on Fred VanVleet. So this is a tough one. What I'll say is that, the difference between the Raptors being a tough playoff team and the Raptors being a serious contender is making that big blockbuster move like they made for Kawhi Leonard. So they don't have a number 1 on a championship team. And I don't know if Scotty Barnes is going to be that within the next few years. So, they were a team that was rumored really heavily for Kevin Durant, and I think that's the reason for it. I don't think that's necessarily their fault because it's just hard to find those guys, but they're definitely a team that I think is going to be super, super aggressive in trying to go get them because if they had that person, the rest of their team built around, and they're great regardless of it, and they have a lot of really good players, but if they had that person, they'd be a serious, serious contender. The Utah Jazz, same thing as the Spurs. They just don't have their guy. They don't have someone with crazy, crazy high upside. Colin Sexton is going to be fun to watch for them. And maybe we could say their biggest problem is that they still have some of their vets and they need to trade them. But that's not even a problem. It's just like it takes some time. You don't have to wait till the trade deadline. But again, a team that just started a rebuild, not that insane, not that crazy, not that many problems. I like what Ainge has done. Again, same thing as the Spurs. I'm glad they blew it up. That was the right call. They weren't getting anywhere with what they had. They don't have their guy yet. They don't have their 1A, their Jalen Green, their Cade Cunningham, their whoever. But of course they don't. And then the Washington Wizards, I said they went in with probably just too mediocre of a team. I think they're going to be good. I've seen some people maybe underrating them a little bit, like, oh, they're going to be the 13 seed. I don't know about that. I think they're going to win more games than people expect just because they're trying to. But at the end of the day, again, this team is in limbo, 35, 40 wins. I don't know if we can seriously compete in a playoff series, but in a perfect world, maybe we'll get there and we'll get a couple extra home games. It's just not a very exciting place to be. And it also means that they're not going to have that great of a draft pick to go get somebody in the draft. So it's not that exciting. But I do think they're going to win more games than some people expect. I think people have written them off too much. And maybe I could say their biggest problem is giving Bradley Beal an ungodly amount of money, even though he's good. But that's what I would say their biggest problem is. And that's all 30 teams. I kind of ran out of gas there a little bit at the end, but I'm interested to see if you disagree with me and you say, no, my team has a much bigger problem than that. There's way worse things than that. My team sucks at this and this and this. But make sure to do all the stuff you're supposed to do on YouTube videos. Like, comment, subscribe. I appreciate you guys sticking all the way through the video, and I'll catch you next time.